This episode is proudly supported by Crunch. Running a hospitality business isn't for the faint-hearted. Between ordering stock, scheduling rosters, paying bills, motivating your team, and keeping customers happy, there's a lot on your plate. It's no surprise that business planning often gets put on the back burner. Well, here's something that can help. Introducing Crunch, a new app to help simplify the business side of hospo. With Crunch, you get access to practical, bite-sized education, proven strategies, and a supportive community of hospo owners just like you. When it comes to the Crunch, if you're looking for proven ways to build a successful, sustainable business, Crunch has you covered. Try Crunch now. To get 14 days free, just head to crunchhospo.com.au.
It's not for me. I very quickly realised that this was not for me. If this is what it took to be a superstar chef, I didn't want to have anything to do with it.
Hey there, welcome to an episode of Dirty Linen. I am Dani Valent and I am thrilled to be with you as always. Today is a little bit different. I am sitting in a country kitchen in the home of Annie Smithers. We are at Babbington Park in Lionville and we're about an hour and a quarter north of Melbourne. The wind is blowing in the eucalypts outside and some cypresses. There are sheep, ducks, geese, a lot of chickens and some beautiful vegetables. Annie Smithers, welcome to Dirty Linen.
Welcome to my little world, Dani.
I love this world. We're sitting here with cups of tea. You have a beautiful knitted tea cosy on the teapot. Tell us about Babbington Park.
Babbington Park is the home of my wife and I for 7.5, nearly 8 years. So Susan and I moved here with her daughters back in March. What does that make it? 2017, I think. And we've set about making, we're making a home. I think that's what it's really all about. Is we have a home that the children have left home now, so it's just the two oldies racketing around with a host of geriatric pets. And on the outside, we devote our time to restoring the old farm buildings here, of creating a beautiful garden for us to enjoy, so what I refer to as a decorative garden. The keeping of some normal and some rare breed animals and poultries, and growing vegetables, fruit and vegetables that I use in the restaurant and we use here at home.
So how far is your restaurant to Fermier from your home?
It's 10 minutes down the road. So Lionville is a little hamlet that is almost halfway between Trentham and Daylesford. So, for those who know those two towns, it's bang in the middle.
And for people who don't know much about Du Fermier, how would you describe it?
Du Fermier is a tiny little restaurant that seats sort of a couple of dozen people. I cook what I sort of refer to these days as French peasant food. So it's a style of country food that is robust, that is friendly, that relies on the provenance and the quality of the raw ingredients rather than the trickery that I can do in a kitchen. So it's to me it's food that is about being loved and leaving you feeling loved and nurtured. So it is, it's just me in the kitchen. I'll have a pot washer with me, and we have two people on the floor led by the extraordinary Bronwyn Cabord. And Bronnie is just the consummate hostess or host or whatever we call them these days. She has a capacity to sprinkle fairy dust over the restaurant that she's a woman who asks people what they like as opposed to telling them what she thinks that they should like. And I think that difference is very stark, and she is very good at taking cues from people and leading them down paths that they'd never think that they'd go down but really love when they get there.
And how does it feel for you to have this ecosystem that you've created, you know, this home, this farm, the restaurant?
It's at times it's an incredibly traumatic relationship that I have with it, because it exposes me to the extraordinary fragility of the food system. We grow almost everything, now that everything's sort of in place. Any new crops we grow from seed. So we start with a seed, and some things take 4 to 6 weeks to grow. Some things take 11, 12 months to mature. So at any point, you could have these howling gales, or a seriously hot day, or an incredibly cold day when it's meant to be warmer, and things just perish, and they perish because they just can't cope with the environment. And so for me, it reminds me of not only how fragile our food system is, but just how fragile life is, whether it's my life or the carrot's life. And that each day is to be enjoyed, because, it's a very special thing.
Well, I think that's a really nice segue to speaking about your book, which has just been released. Kitchen Sentimental is your story. It's a really moving memoir. I found it a really gripping read, an actual page turner. Because it takes us through the ups and downs of your cooking life. And I suppose having come to the end of it, I really got a sense how important this chapter is that you've created, this anchoring. And it took you a lot of things that weren't right to find things that were.
Well, I've always been a great believer in the fact that failure is in fact the best teacher. And failure in kitchens it's not always welcome. It's much easier to deal with failure in a domestic kitchen than is in a commercial kitchen, because there's a lot of ramifications on a lot of levels with that. But I'm not a person that believes in a great deal of learning from success. It's actually looking at why things haven't worked out, why things have failed, why you haven't coped, why the custard split. It's always, you don't know that something's wrong until it happens. And so, as much with working out sort of how I can improve a sweet short crust, so it's not my nemesis and it rolls out beautifully and the end result is as special as I'd like it to be, it's also about working through who I am, and how to roll me out in a way that I don't break up into pieces and let the custard all run out, and that I actually can form a reasonably solid human being that sort of gets through their day without too much drama. What's
a chapter that refers to a period in your life that the custard really did spill out a bit?
Oh, there's a few of those. I think the biggest chapter was the chapter in there that the custard really fell out. I don't think the pastry held together in the first place, let alone getting to the custard stage. But I think it's the chapter about the year that I went down back to the city after being in the country for 8 years, and I went back to work at Pearl, Jeff Lindsay's Pearl. And Jeff and I had had a relationship at Stephanie's in terms of, we worked in the same kitchen, and he had gone on to be the head chef at Stephanie's for some years. And then through the 90s had Stella at the top of Spring Street, and then went on to create Pearl. And for a long time in my life, I was a very egotistical young chef. I was very keen on, I was attracted to the fame and it's a funny world that as a young chef, you lust for reviews, you lust for, people saying how wonderful you are. And it's a very it's a very I am existence, or it was for me. And, it also breaks down that sort of team mentality of sometimes I think that you think that, if you get the success, that's great for everybody else, but you forget that you are part of a team, and whether it's a front of house team and a kitchen team working together that you lord over or behave badly in. So I did feel very much that it was, at that time when I applied to work at Pearl, I really felt that I'd missed out. I'd missed out on by coming to the country, and I'd had 4 years at Lake House. I'd had a couple of years at the Lavender Farm, which conversely, having written the book and gone back through it all, is those 2 years between 96 and 98, I would say would be the most precious cooking times in my entire life, because I was cooking in a space that I loved. No one had any inkling about Annie Smithers or anything like that. And the fact with cooking with love, with absolutely no one was expecting anything. And that was just a purely positive experience. So then I had a little go at having a restaurant, and that didn't work out. And then I was, camping in a cafe for a minute. And I looked at what was happening in Melbourne, and I felt that I'd missed out. And I thought, this is the opportunity. And I went and saw Jeff, and I had an interview, and it was this amazing thing. He wanted to replicate, the system that we had at Stephanie's of a senior chef and apprentice chef in each system, in each section. It was beautifully thought out. It was backed. It was, the real beginning of those ultra beautiful fit outs. I mean, do you remember the extraordinary fit out that it had?
Yeah, I remember that it felt very contemporary, like Melbourne hadn't seen a restaurant like that. I remember the buzz and the energy and the excitement. I don't know, I can't picture it, but I feel like there was a slickness and a shininess, and there were iPads and there were things that we hadn't really seen before.
Oh, there was beautiful Pirelli rubber floor.
Yeah.
There was a mother of pearl screen in front of the sort of little tiny slitted kitchen window, this beautiful automatic pearl door. It was absolutely exquisite. It's like everything you dream of being a really beautiful restaurant opening. And, in the 25 years that have gone, we're pretty used to really big flash fit outs. And one of the things that I find sad is that they don't last, is all that money and all that skill, and then they have to be rebranded and rebooted. But so off I went to Pearl, and it was my undoing. And it was a point where it was pre-social media, it was pre-digital media, so this is really only driven by press media and, what I refer to as the pre-digital social media of all the buzz of amongst people and cohorts of friends that just push and push. And the pressure that was exerted on that restaurant in opening was something that I had never known and never experienced. And it wasn't for me. It sent me into this, I was there for 6 months. I did my very best with it. I worked some incredibly long hours, but slowly but surely it chipped away and exposed all the mental frailties that perhaps I'd hidden for years, until I ended up with, neither of my wrists worked because I had some sort of carpal tunnel syndrome in them, and I just had to go away. And at that point, I thought that I would never, ever cope with the pressure of service again.
It's the way you write about it, it's very vivid and nightmarish. And I mean, it's not critical of Pearl as a phenomenon, but it is definitely explains how it wasn't for you.
I think there's something in there that sort of it's definitely not critical of Pearl. And what I think the criticism that I have, and it's something that, when you ask sort of what is it about this world and the restaurant and that sort of thing, is that it's not for me. I very quickly realised that this was not for me. If this is what it took to be a superstar chef, I didn't want to have anything to do with it. That was what I got out of it, because you've been around the industry long enough to know that, you know, there are openings that are easy and there are openings that are not easy, and there is pressure put on restaurants and restaurateurs and cooks and front of house people that in hindsight looks ridiculous because it's just lunch. Yeah, the reality is it's just lunch or it's just dinner. And I understand that there's a financial transaction, and I understand that people want to get what they're paying for and things. But it is a world of high pressure that I don't excel in. And lots of people do. And good luck to them. And I think that's really great that they can cope with it. But I think it's really great that I've acknowledged the fact that I need a small, nurturing little restaurant that doesn't... Look, it can get hairy at times, and I'm often I need to get the brush cutter out for the weeds at 10 customer time, but it's just not for me.
Do you think that, I mean, you take that on yourself, like it wasn't the restaurant, it was you. I mean, do you think that hospitality as an industry could be a kinder place for, people who, why should people be able to deal with such pressure?
I think that, post-COVID, there's definitely been a couple of strains of how to go forward. I think your family of podcasts have definitely, been incredibly aware of the fact that, you want to be positive, you want to say good things. And I remember very early on in my apprenticeship at Stephanie had come back from eating somewhere. And, she was asked when she was in the kitchen the next day, what did she think of it? And everybody's hanging on her words. And she said something, and she just said something like, oh, the bread was really delicious. And it had to be translated for me. I was 18 at the time. And someone said, oh, that means that I don't think she really enjoyed it. But she didn't want to say something negative about it, so she found something positive to say about the experience. And that stayed with me for a very long time. I haven't always executed it. I haven't always been kind. I'm still not always kind. But there is a sense with hospitality that you guys... the Deep in the Weeds family, you choose to highlight the positives. And I think that is a huge step forward for food media. I think the days of castigating a restaurant for its failures they're gone. And people would argue that, you need to let people know that they're not up to standard, or, well, the best thing is don't publicise them, because if you point out in a public forum, if you give them their report card in a public forum, it can be it's really tough. And I think the one side of that a lot of us are feeling in the restaurant industry is the online review process. I'm forbidden by my staff and my family and medical professionals to read online reviews anymore. They are too destructive to me mentally, because if there is something that is of great importance that can and should be fixed, I'm alerted to it and I deal with it. But that general sort of slashing at the grass, under your feet is not very good for anybody's mental health. So can the industry be kinder? I think so, but then there's also a whole sector of people who are not Annie Smithers who really love that cut and thrust, and they thrive on those really big openings. They thrive on empire building of restaurants. They thrive on kitchens that are going and going and going and going and always under the pump. It's just not for me. And I think, for anyone that works in this industry is it does take time to find out who you are, and it does take time to find, you know, the environments that actually work for you.
I mean, I think you're right in saying that, you know, at the Deep in the Weeds network, we focus on the positives and try to tell positive stories, but I think we also give people a platform to share things that are really hard, and we've certainly tackled some issues in the industry that are, you know, like not bright and shiny and happy. And as you do in your book, you know, it's you talk about some big struggles, like personal but also financial, and I think you're particularly open about some of the financial failures that have you've encountered in your journey.
My restaurant life.
How important do you think it is for people to go into hospitality businesses with their eyes open and their spreadsheets open as well?
Well, again, I think there's a lot of learning in it, and particularly at the moment when it's really tough. So I'm coming up to 20 years of between De Fermier and Annie Smithers Bistro, and I'm incredibly proud of the fact that as a self-funded restaurateur in small country towns, I've survived and navigated this. One of the things is that it is it's hard at the moment, but I know that the economic cycle changes and it will get better. It's just you have to tough out these really tough bits. And, yeah, I'd love to save. Next time it's really, you know, lush, I'd love to save for tomorrow, but I know I never will because that's not who I am. So, but people need to be very, you need to remember not to be too proud to ask for help. And I think, you know, that the spectre of asking for help, you know, whether it's ringing the tax department and asking for, you know, a payment plan, you know, they're actually really quite nice to deal with when you get them on the phone and you don't shout at them. They're quite helpful. It's not fun. None of that is fun. You know, utility bills, all of those sort of things. If you're having a really tough time, you can ask for help. And sometimes it's just, you know, if it's too hard for you personally, get somebody else to make the call and be on hand to give the authorisation for them to deal with it. But, you know, just don't be too proud. The other thing is there's a risk of, you know, often with brand management is sometimes we can be really quick to, you know, diversify our brands really, you know, dilute them really quickly in this, you know, horror of, you know, what am I going to do? How am I going to make the money? Am I going to do this? Am I going to do that? What's going to save me? It's sort of just take a deep breath and have a think about, you know, what your core values of your restaurant are. And sometimes it's, and this is something that I've done, and it doesn't work for everybody, but sometimes being as small as possible and accepting the fact that there's only going to be a limited amount of money coming in is you use that money very wisely. You know what your costs are going to be, so you extend it over there. But also, you know, if we call it the De Beers principle of if you restrict supply, you know, then you almost guarantee demand. So then you can shrink your business to a certain point so that you maximise your use of labour, you maximise your use of goods, you maximise your use of electricity and all of those static things that are costing us so much now. And then once you're over the really hard bits, then you can start to get a bit bigger. But sometimes going smaller is better than, you know, trying desperately to make more money.
Yeah, we're definitely seeing more people going small. It feels like that part of hospitality that's in the middle, perhaps, you know, the 60 to 120 seat restaurant with a, you know, sole owner or a family owned business is struggling, and we see a lot more groups coming up or groups getting bigger and bigger. I mean, from your vantage point, how do you see the industry?
Well, at various times over the last 20 years, I have worried about the mum and dad restaurant, the little restaurant. But having successfully navigated that now for a couple of decades, I think it always has a place. And I think it is often the best form of restaurant for truly passionate hospitality people. And the reason I say that is that they have complete control over it in terms of where they want to go, where they want to take it, how they want. They have a better capacity to grow it, in the sense of sort of they can start with the bare necessities and then add their flourishes and touches to create it into what they want it to be. So I think that it has, and there's also the fact that, we're now entering a world where I think a lot of people accept the fact they're not going to make a lot of money. So there's a chance to look at it and say, how much money does it take to run our life? What is it that we need, and why don't we just work towards that rather than let's take some more covers and let's have a really great week and let's really spank it and let's really drive everybody into the ground to, make a couple of $1,000 extra. Well, where's it going to go? What's it going to do? You're living your dream, you're living your life, you haven't got time to do anything with it. So it's about, and also engineering a bit of life-work balance. But then the groups also have a huge role in the hospitality industry, because they are the ones that can, have much bigger environments, which teaches people very different skills. It also allows bigger pools of staff to be trained, to be educated, to be nurtured within the industry. And so where you've got a tiny little mum and dad restaurant that might, in my case, employ a couple of local people or a couple of kids as dishwashers and things and nurture those in our environment, the bigger groups do a lot more work with keeping the hospitality industry fueled and solid, particularly with staff, and being able to offer them really good jobs that also allows them to rise in the ranks to make it a lifelong career. And not sort of, and then they either go off and, work in a new thing for the group, or they splinter off and become their own little entities. So I think there's room for everybody, but there is that middle range restaurant, those old restaurants of, they're the ones that sit in the graph where, there's a little pile at the bottom that, that has the smallest takes, but have a decent living, and then the take goes up but the profit goes down until you get to a certain size where there's another sweet spot. So it's about learning all of those sort of curves and, good bits and bad bits.
I've just had the privilege and joy of wandering around Babbington Park with you, and I think what's one of the things that was very striking is your little, I don't know, hobbies sounds diminishing, but just your obsessions and things that you've spent a lot of time growing and developing. And I suppose two things that stick with me is the woad, which is, as I just learnt, is a plant that has a blue dye that was used before indigo was, discovered. And the other one is your different colour palette of hen's eggs. I suppose I'm using that to start to talk about connection to produce and life cycles and nature. And how important do you think that is, and how imperiled do you think that is?
It's very much in peril in my mind, and I think that it is it's a very vexed issue. The food system is food has become a commodity. A long time ago, food wasn't a commodity. It was just a basic right. We got to eat, and there were food markets. There was a lot of bartering. That's back in the day, but the life cycle of sort of my lifetime is that we've seen a huge food has been completely commodified, which means that so much of food is grown for money. And that might sound stupid to someone listening, but what it has done is it has changed the way that we produce food. And that means that time is money. And so the quicker you grow something, the better it is for the person growing it or the person paying for it to be grown, as the supermarkets often do. So I think I don't know, have you read Ben's book about with the chapter about the French fries? It's a beautiful enunciation of the chip industry, the French fry industry. But it goes to the fact that we don't have a lot of information about where our food comes and how it's grown and why it's grown the way that it is. So you can see a lot of heirloom vegetables at your fruit and veggie shop or at the supermarket or whatever, and they might look great and they've got heirloom written all over them, but they don't taste of anything. They don't taste any better than the ones next to them that are not heirloom. And the reason is that they're grown with massive amounts of water and, they're pumped up, a bit like the chickens. They're genetically modified now so that they grow really quickly and everybody gets the best bang for their buck. Now, when you spend time growing stuff like I do or, fiddling around with things, is you realise that there's so much more to it. So food grown slowly. So some food grows really quickly and that's just its life cycle, but some things take time. And my carrots might take 3 or 4 months longer than a commercial carrot, but they taste like carrots. So there's this, and they don't have a lot of water used on them. So they're not pumped up with water because water's weight and weight is money. It's the same as the washing processes with meat and poultry, is everything's washed. So more weight in there because of the water. So by having the luxury of being able to set up my little universe here, is I get to explore the wonder of real food. And I get to see the life cycle of stuff. And, you mentioned egg colours. So, I keep various breeds of chickens that lay different coloured eggs. And, I've got some chickens that lay a big blue egg and the cream leg bar chicken, and I've got another chicken called a French Marin that lays a brown egg. It's taken me 3 years of crossbreeding to get something known as an olive egg layer, which is a little green egg. The eggs taste the same. It's just the joy. And it's the same with sort of something like the woad, is I have a particular penchant for the colour blue. I went to France a few years ago. I was fascinated by all the woodwork. So in the southwest of France, all those beautiful blue shutters. And my friend Kate Hill told me about woad. Woad is a plant that is very much a brassica, a part of the brassica family. The leaves were dealt with in a certain way to make the blue pigment that the Scots also used in painting themselves and things before indigo came across, in the Middle Ages. So I got some woad seeds and I grew some woad. It took me about 3 or 4 years to get around to doing it. So first year you make the woad from the dye from the leads. Next year you let it go to seed and you collect the seeds and you start all over again. It was the most extraordinary process of boiling it up and bringing it down to temperature and adding washing soda to it to fix it and things. And for all of that time and all of that effort, I've got this tiny little jar of blue powder that eventually I'll use to dye the wool that I have or the fleece from my cashmere goats. But it's that connection, for me it's the connection to the obscure, I suppose, but it speaks to the fact that we are losing the connection to to where our food comes from. And I'm lucky enough and educated enough and interested enough to go into these obscurities. But then on the other hand, part of those obsessions are leading me down the path of something called a victory garden. Now, do you know about victory gardens, Dani?
Is it a post-First World War?
It's a Second World War initiative from England and America.
Right.
And it's one of these things that I'm fascinated by because it was a war effort. So because all the men were away at war, we had to grow food in our back gardens. And it's highly documented because it was all printed. So in America, there's heaps of information and old pamphlets and things about how to set up various size vegetable gardens in your backyard. And then there's further publications about canning and preserving and bottling and those sort of things. And it's one of those things that I think, we should, we've missed a couple of generations of having really good backyard, vegetables. And I think it's sort of time that, while we're, at war with the climate, is that it's those sort of things that you pluck from obscurity that remind you that this is possible and this is a reason to get off your doom scrolling and go and weed your onions. But to have a hand in what we eat reminds us, as I said before, not only of the food system's fragility, but of our own fragility. And that need, that we all have personally. I mean, not everybody wants to put their hands in the earth like I do to ground them, but there's a reason that electricity is grounded, I think. And I think it's, it's something that I take really seriously, that, putting my hands in the dirt can sometimes just make everything all right.
I mean, you've talked about the fragility of the food system, and when you mentioned Victory Gardens, you think about a society-wide priority that is given to growing food. So I feel like we do have to talk about water. If you're up for a brief, and I'll try to summarise the situation.
Well, why don't I just make an admission first? Is that it has come to my attention that for the past 7.5 years, I have been operating outside of the legal framework in growing vegetables for my restaurant.
I mean, I've heard it a few times, but it's a gobsmacking thing to take on. So we don't need to go into all the backstory and details, but basically because of archaic legislation that is not really fit for the society that we seem to be telling ourselves that we want to live in, you are not allowed to water your vegetables and use them commercially.
I'm not allowed to water my vegetables and use them in the restaurant. So commercial is a funny word, and I think it is, as we move through the 21st century, we're seeing, particularly in my field, we're seeing a lot more restaurants have kitchen gardens. And one of the things, and it comes back to, that fact about making mistakes. If someone hadn't anonymously dobbed me into the water board, I would not have understood all of this. So I have to look at it from a positive point of view of I now have a much better understanding of the water legislation, and I also now have a desire to try and make some change to that for the benefit of future generations. So it's actually incredibly clearly written in a fantastic resource that the Australian Food Sovereignty Alliance have put out about food, the water licences that you need to grow food commercially. And the thing about horticulture and market gardens is no matter how small you are, you need a water licence to grow food commercially. Then we get to the semantics of what is commercial. So our local council doesn't view us as commercial because we don't on-sell those vegetables as vegetables. The water board views me as commercial because I use them in the restaurant. So therefore they are a commercial product. So there's semantics, within that I can't quite work out, but that's okay. So we have an allocation here where we are allowed to use 2 megalitres of either ground or surface water, which means bore or well water is groundwater, surface water is dam water. We're allowed to use 2 megalitres of that for domestic use, so that's for me and Susan and the domestic garden, our own vegetable garden, our own flower gardens, all of those sort of things. We can also use that water to water stock. And this is a very old law. And that means that we can, in fact, fatten as many calves or sheep or lambs or whatever and send them off to market and on-sell them. But we are allowed to use that water for stock or personal use. So we can have our vegetable garden and we can water our vegetable garden and we can grow all of these vegetables. And I can even charge you money to come on a instructive educational garden tour and show you all of those vegetables. But as soon as I harvest those vegetables and take them into the restaurant, I have to use different water to use them. So it's a bit mind-boggling to me, particularly when I live with a vegan who says, how come we can water the cows but not the carrots? But it is the legislation as it stands. So I feel that we need to motivate, and water is one of the most valuable, if not the most valuable resource we have. It's an incredibly tricky area to get into because there's a lot of heat in the water market and the legislation surrounding it and who gets what and things. But I do feel that there is room for the laws to be updated, that if we're allowed to water stock and we're allowed personal use, we should, on a very small capacity, be able to use it for small horticulture, because it seems that fruit and vegetables are getting the real rough end of the stick here. They don't get considered in the small micro farming market. And from our knowledge of what we've learnt, particularly this century, is one of the ways of getting young people into farming, and it's something a lot of hospo people are really, they're drawn to it, is I know that from under an acre of land, we can grow enough vegetables that could sustain a very basic existence for me and Susan. But if you add the impost of having to, we can only now water our vegetables if I want to use them from rainwater collected in tanks. Not rainwater collected in a dam, because that has to have a licence. So it's quite confusing, it's bewildering, but then on the other hand, it's very straightforward.
Well, I think the straightforward bit for me is you start by thinking about the world that you want to live in, and then you create the legal structures to support that.
Yeah.
You don't stop somebody doing something that's evidently lovely, living on the land, farming carrots and broccoli for a lovely little restaurant that people love, and turn her into a criminal.
Well, Criminal Smithers. I wonder what my number would be.
I would love to give vegetables a go, and particularly your vegetables and these slow-grown carrots, which sound very delicious. If I was to come and visit you in the restaurant, how would you cook those carrots for me?
Well, we have a bit of a glut of carrots at the moment because we sowed a few too many. So at the moment, I am starting the menu with a little composed salad, and it is of I roast them with a bit of water and butter in the bottom of the pan so that they're not, some of them are roasted on the top and some of them are just cooked in the water, so they've got slightly different textures and flavours and caramels and things. And then they're on a bit of dreaming goat curd on the bottom of the plate and some rocket or tatsoi or red mazuna or something coming out of the garden, and just some fruits that are, it's almost, I was thinking about it the other day, it's sort of like a little carrot panzanella, because the bread, the little crunchy, some of them are crunchy and some of them have soaked up the sort of sherry vinaigrette I dress it with. So it's just a little composed salad of carrot and leaves, a little bit of dairy, a little bit of acid for the vinaigrette, a bit of oil,
Yum. It sounds simple and wholesome, and
relies on the fact that the carrots have flavour.
Yes, the sweetness and the sunshine, and the soil that I know you nurture with such tenderness and joy. This is the food that we should be eating, and the fact that you can grow it here, take it to the restaurant and serve it to people who appreciate it, that is the world that I want to live in.
That's good.
Annie, it's always such a pleasure to speak to you. Congratulations on Kitchen Sentimental. It's an important book, I reckon, because it shows that someone's journey through food can be very personal, and you don't have to, there's no road set out for you. You can really find your own path and end up somewhere very beautiful. Thanks for sharing with us today.
Thank you so much for coming to visit.
This is Dirty Linen, and I'm Dani Valent. We air the issues that the hospitality industry finds hard to talk about, hearing from different people with unique perspectives. We want to hear from you as well. If you have something that needs to be said about a topic, get in touch so we can include your perspective. Contact us at dirtylinen@deepintheweeds.com.au or hit us up on Insta @Dirty Linen Podcast. We can't wait to hear from you.